Rain stitched a soft pattern against the tall windows as Julia Dawson set a copper pan onto the flame and watched a knob of butter melt to a glossy pool. The kitchen had been designed to impress: white marble, a wall of glass, matte brass pulls that caught the dim light. But it felt cavernous with only her in it. She checked the timer for the fish already resting under foil, then returned to the arborio rice, letting it toast just long enough to release that nutty, hopeful scent before she ladled in stock and stirred. On the far counter, a bottle of white waited in an ice sleeve, sweating faintly, and beside it she had arranged a cheese board the way she remembered from the old restaurant. Fan the slices, leave the rinds, give the olives a shine. It was their 3rd anniversary. She wanted it to look effortless. She wanted it to be enough. The room tilted, not visually at first. Something inside her, tipping, as if her heart had stumbled on a step it didn't see. She set the ladle down and caught the edge of the counter with both hands. The marble was cold. Her vision tightened into a tunnel and then widened again, as if the dimmers on the world were being dragged up and down by an indecisive hand. Breathe in, count 3. Breathe out, count 3. The thud in her chest slowed, though a high metallic whine still chased the edges of her hearing. She'd had episodes like this for weeks now, sudden and unkind, and the clinic visits had been both kind and useless. Labs normal, EKG unremarkable, stay hydrated. Could be stress, let's monitor. She slid onto a stool until the sway passed. The risotto waited patiently, the rice small and stubborn. She resumed stirring. She tasted, considered, added a whisper of lemon zest to brighten the cream, and smiled at the memory of the chef who used to show her little tricks like that on slow afternoons. Back then, she'd worn black and balanced 3 plates along one arm, and nobody had called her Mrs. Dawson. She plated the fish, a silky, pale fillet under a sauce she'd coaxed from cream and pan juices and a secret spoon of Dijon, and checked the table one more time. Linen, the good silver, 2 crystal stems that chimed when she placed them too close together. Michael texted, "Running late, don't wait." She stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Running late was a suit jacket tossed across a chair at 11:30, a distracted kiss that missed her mouth, the scent of a bar's expensive wood clinging to his tie. She returned the phone to the counter face down, lifted the wine, and nearly set it right back when the floor rolled again, a slow ocean swell she could not see. She forced herself to pour only a taste. It steadied her, that small, normal motion, and the glass caught the light like a promise. The front door opened. "You went all out," Michael called, voice bright with approval that always sounded a step away from performance. He was handsome in the cultivated way of men who hire other people to remember their preferences. Close shave, restrained cufflinks, the kind of watch that didn't tell time so much as hint at worth. He pecked her cheek, glanced past her to the table, then to the fish. "Smells expensive." "It's just dinner," she said, smiling because it cost nothing. "Everything is something," he said, loosening his tie. "Did you make whatever that rice thing is again?" "Risotto." He nodded as if he'd been about to say it. "And the wine. Please tell me it's not sweet." "It's dry." Her voice thinned, wind through a door jamb. She hated that. They sat. He lifted his fork as if adjudicating a competition, then paused. "You know," he said, "I got cornered after a meeting today. People ask the weirdest questions. Any kids yet? When are you two going to start a family? I swear, I should have business cards printed. We're still waiting. Or maybe my wife isn't ready." Her hand went cold on the stem. "I never said, not ready, unable, whatever," he said, already bored with the distinction. "Look, it's just basic biology. For most people." He smiled the way some people close a door. "But hey, cheers." He raised his glass. "To 3 years." She lifted hers, found his eyes, heard the faint clink, and thought of the last blood draw that left a tender bruise in the crook of her arm, the nurse's gentle apology, the doctor's practiced neutrality. "Everything looks fine. Sometimes we don't get answers. If anything changes, come back." He ate. He approved. He told a story about a client whose name sounded like a yacht. She tried to follow, but the symptoms had retreated to a watchful distance and left a fog behind, and more than once she realized she'd lost the thread and nodded anyway. He didn't seem to notice. He rarely needed her to. When the plates were cleared and the radio in the corner had played 2 songs she didn't remember choosing, the doorbell chimed. Agnes arrived in a camel coat and a smile cut to fit any room. Her perfume the faint, expensive kind that makes you think of a winter shop window. She kissed Julia's cheek and held it a fraction too long, as if reading the temperature of the skin. "Darling, you look pale," she said softly, which was a kindness and also an indictment. "But the table lovely. Truly, linen suits your hands." "Traffic was a nightmare," Michael said, pulling a chair for his mother, which he never did for Julia. "You should have seen the mess on I-5. Agnes removed her gloves 1 finger at a time. "I do hope you're taking time for yourself, Julia. A proper salon. Good skin is an investment, not a miracle. And posture." She tapped her spine lightly with a glove, a playful metronome. "Confidence begins where the back refuses to collapse. Men notice." "Mother," Michael said, amused, not warning. "It's sound advice," Agnes replied, the smile never leaving. "And if you must work so hard in the kitchen, hire someone to deep clean the stubborn corners. There's no reason to scrub away your youth. Leave that to people who bill by the hour." Julia poured her a glass and kept her voice even. "We're fine." "I'm sure you are. But when the family grows, a glance deliberate as a placed chess piece, time becomes a luxury you can't buy back." The air inside Julia seemed to thin. She sipped water and set it down carefully so it wouldn't show her hands. Outside, the rain drew faint lines down the glass, as if the night were being cross-hatched. She could feel her heart again, counting something she couldn't name. She thought of the clinics, the tidy rooms and their framed degrees, the noncommittal phrases arranged like flowers. She thought of the quiet that filled this house when Michael was away and Agnes was only a well-meaning specter at the edge of a message thread. She thought of the way the marble had steadied her when the world tilted. It steadied her now. "Dessert?" she asked, and her voice held. "I made something simple." "Leave it," Michael said, already rising. "We have an early start. The firm's pushing a close. You understand." Agnes patted Julia's hand, the lightest percussion. "You did beautifully, dear." She stood, the coat finding her shoulders like a conclusion. Rest. A good night's sleep performs miracles nothing else can. After they left, the house closed around her with the soft thud of the latch. The dishes waited. The radio murmured. She leaned back against the counter and listened to the rain lengthen its lines. The symptoms, for the moment, slept, but the questions did not. She washed the plates 1 by 1, not rushing, and set them to dry in a neat shining row, as if order itself could be a kind of medicine, as if you could stir enough and things would come together, glossy and whole. Julia gathered the dishes into a neat stack, rinsed them under water still warm from the kettle, and slid them into the dishwasher. The house settled into its usual hush, only the steady rain against glass breaking the quiet. She bent to wipe the marble counter one last time, and that was when she saw it, a flattened carton lodged half hidden at the bottom of the stainless steel trash bin. At first she thought it was leftover packaging from some new vitamin Michael had ordered. He was forever trying boutique supplements, but the print wasn't familiar. She pulled it free. The box was European instructions in dense lettering, the kind of insert that folds like a map. The brand name meant nothing to her. But the warning symbols, the stark black exclamation points in red triangles, clutched at her. She carried it to her laptop. A quick search turned her kitchen brighter than any light bulb. Neuroleptic hypotency, not FDA approved, contraindicated without psychiatric supervision. Side effects: dizziness, cardiac arrhythmia, fainting, risk of collapse if misused. Her pulse jumped as if the words themselves had triggered it. She read testimonials in quiet forums, frantic relatives describing sudden blackouts, blood pressure crashes, nights in ERs. She remembered her own visits, the cold EKG electrodes, the doctor's polite smile. Everything looks normal. The edges of the box cut faint lines into her palm as she carried it to the sink. For a moment she thought of shredding it, of letting water erase the evidence. But evidence of what? Maybe Michael had samples for someone else. Maybe Agnes had insisted on some holistic experiment. The thoughts sounded weak, even as she assembled them. Her phone was on the counter. She dialed. The line clicked once. What? Michael's voice, distracted, office loud in the quiet of the kitchen. "I found something," she said, aiming for calm. "A medicine carton in the trash. Neuroleptics. Imported. Did you buy this?" A pause, then the faint scratch of his laugh. "Julia, you can't go rifling through garbage and diagnosing yourself off Google. You sound paranoid." "I've been sick," she reminded him softer. "Weeks now. Dizzy, faint, my heart. Stress," he cut in. "You've been reading too many blogs. If something were wrong, the clinics would have found it. They didn't. End of story. Don't call me at work again about trash." The line went dead. She held the phone until the screen dimmed. The rain had thickened, smearing the windows with lines that blurred the city lights outside. She returned the box to the counter. Its presence felt louder than the clock on the wall. If she hadn't thought to empty the trash herself, she wouldn't have seen it. If she hadn't searched, she wouldn't have known how closely the warnings mirrored her own nights of clutching the countertop while the room spun. She poured herself water and forced a sip. The taste was clean, harmless, but her throat tightened anyway. Maybe the sickness wasn't chance. Maybe it wasn't her body betraying her at all. She set the carton in a drawer out of sight, but she couldn't quiet the truth already uncoiling. Something deliberate might be at work here. Something inside her house. She turned off the kitchen lights, but the suspicion traveled with her, whispering with every step across the hardwood, that her illness might not be random, and the person closest to her might be the one behind it. Julia's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the shopping bag on the passenger seat. Inside, cushioned between layers of tissue as though it were something fragile, sat the small black box she'd purchased downtown that afternoon. It wasn't from a department store. She'd made sure of that. She'd driven out of the neighborhood, away from familiar shops, into a block lined with electronics outlets and pawn shops. The clerk had barely looked up when she asked for a discreet security camera. He pointed to a shelf, rattled off 2 models, and swiped her card without comment. To him, she was just another customer. To her, this was survival. Back in the driveway, she sat for a moment with the engine ticking down, listening to the patter of Portland rain on the roof. The camera wasn't large, no bigger than a thumb, but the weight of what it might capture pressed on her chest. She carried the bag inside, careful not to leave a receipt in the kitchen trash this time. The house was still. Michael wasn't home yet, and Agnes wasn't due until dinner. Julia took the step stool from the pantry and placed it near the breakfast bar. Her fingers worked quickly, unwrapping the device, charging it just enough, connecting it to her laptop to test the feed. A pale image of her own face blinked back at her. She adjusted the angle, found the perfect perch above the counter where the two of them always sat for coffee or wine. Anyone standing there would be in full view, glass in hand, plate within reach. She mounted it, taped the cord flush, and smoothed everything until it looked untouched. From the corner of the room, she opened the app again. Clear picture. Sound steady. Timestamp running. Relief tangled with dread. She stepped down from the stool and folded it away, rehearsing her face in the reflection of the darkened window. She would have to act. She would have to smile. That evening, she laid out her armor. The dress was burgundy silk, fitted but modest, a far cry from the waitress uniform she once wore. She curled her hair into loose waves, lined her eyes softly, and dabbed color on her lips. In the mirror, she looked older than 25, not in years, but in knowing. The version of herself Michael expected was pliant, apologetic, grateful. Tonight, she would let him believe she was that woman, while the camera watched for the truth. When Michael came through the door, shaking rain from his coat, he stopped mid-motion. "Well," he said, eyebrows lifting, "don't you look different?" She tilted her head, smiling lightly. "Happy anniversary." He kissed her cheek, perfunctory but approving, and glanced toward the table. "You outdid yourself. What's the occasion?" "It's the 3rd year," she said, smoothing her dress. "Worth marking, don't you think?" He laughed, a warm sound that almost disguised the edge beneath it. "I suppose you're right." They sat together at the bar. Julia poured water into one glass, wine into another, her movements graceful, practiced. She excused herself, just checking the oven, and slipped into the kitchen proper, heart hammering. On her phone, the feed displayed Michael, alone now, reaching for the bottle of wine. He poured into both glasses, then reached into his pocket. A small packet glinted under the light as he tore it open with a casual flick. The powder cascaded into her glass. He stirred with a fork, glancing toward the kitchen as if listening for her steps, then slipped the packet back into his jacket. A moment later, he leaned over her plate of risotto and sprinkled the remainder, stirring quickly. His expression was untroubled, almost bored, like a man adding salt. Julia's stomach turned, but she kept her pace even as she returned, as though nothing had happened. She took her seat, lifted her glass, and met his eyes. He raised his own, clinked hers. "To us," he said. "To us," she echoed. She brought the rim to her lips and let the liquid brush them, tilting just enough to wet her mouth without swallowing. She smiled, placed the glass down, and lifted her fork. A small bite of risotto, touched only to her lips, then set aside. She dabbed her napkin, murmured how delicious it was. Michael seemed pleased, nodding, chewing, watching her subtly. If he noticed the hesitation, he didn't show it. He reached across, brushing her hand with calculated warmth, the portrait of a devoted husband. Inside, Julia counted the seconds. The camera had seen everything. Tonight, she would not collapse against the counter, gasping for breath. Tonight, she would walk away from the table, knowing the truth had been caught on film. She chewed one final bite of bread for show, and her heart steadied with a different kind of thrum. Not fear this time, but resolve. She smiled again, bright enough to fool him, and raised her glass once more. The camera's red light stayed hidden, its silent witness capturing every frame of the performance. The next morning, Julia sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, the blinds still drawn against the pale Oregon light. Her hands hovered over the keyboard before she forced herself to click into the saved file. The video unfurled across the screen in grainy detail, Michael lifting the bottle, pouring wine, tearing the packet, the white powder dissolving into her glass with a lazy swirl, then into her food. He stirred quickly, his face calm, almost bored. He checked over his shoulder once, toward the very spot where she had been standing, out of sight. Then he smoothed his expression and sat down as though nothing had happened. Her stomach clenched. She'd seen it with her own eyes last night, but watching it now, with the camera's indifferent witness, turned the act from suspicion to certainty. It wasn't in her head. It wasn't stress or hormones or the vague diagnoses the clinics had handed her. Michael had been poisoning her. The person who toasted her with a smile had tried to slip her into silence. She leaned back, the chair creaking, and let out a slow, careful breath. Fear tried to fill the space around her, but resolve pressed back. She couldn't confront him yet, not without a plan. She needed more than one video. She needed a pattern, something undeniable. So she rehearsed a new role. That evening, when Michael returned, she allowed him to pour her tea, smiling faintly as he set the cup before her. She waited until he turned to check his phone, then lifted it to her lips, let the steam brush her face, and tilted it just enough for a convincing sip. Later, she emptied the contents into the sink, rinsed the porcelain, and placed it back in the cupboard as if she'd finished every drop. Days turned into a rhythm. Michael brought her glasses of juice in the morning, cocoa at night, little offerings wrapped in the soft tone of a caring husband. "You've been so pale lately," he murmured one evening, setting a steaming mug before her. "This will help." His eyes lingered with mock concern. She smiled back, touched the cup to her lips, and excused herself to fetch a napkin. In the bathroom, she poured the sweet liquid down the drain, the scent of chocolate clinging to the sink as evidence of her charade. And something changed. The dizziness that had haunted her began to fade. The heart flutters eased. Her skin warmed. For the first time in weeks, she woke without the sense that the room was spinning. The absence of illness was its own proof, as damning as the video. Every day she avoided what he gave her, her health returned a little more. Michael, though, seemed almost invigorated by her supposed decline. He touched her shoulder more often, asked how she felt, lingered in the doorway with a furrow of concern. "You should rest," he said, pressing a glass of juice into her hands. "I hate seeing you like this." His tenderness was a mask, but he wore it well. Anyone watching would think him devoted. Julia played along. She let her hand tremble faintly as she accepted the glass. She nodded weakly when he suggested she lie down. She even let her head tip against the cushion while he watched television, the image of a fragile wife under her husband's care. All the while, the untouched drink cooled at her side until she could carry it quietly to the sink. It became a game of survival, a cat and mouse staged in her own home. He waited for signs of collapse. She gave him faintness at the right moments, a sigh, a hand pressed to her temple. He pressed closer with every display, his arm around her, his voice soft, coaxing. She noted it all, careful to memorize his expressions, his words, the way his eyes sharpened when he thought she wasn't looking. At night, when the house fell still, she returned to the laptop. She cataloged each clip, labeled each file, watched him drop powder into her tea, her juice, her meals. It became a grim collection, a library of his betrayals. She backed it up twice on a flash drive she hid inside a box of flour in the pantry, and on a cloud account he didn't know she had. By the end of the week, Julia's strength had returned enough for her to walk through the rooms without clinging to the walls. She let her hair down again, painted her lips, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone preparing for war. Michael noticed. "You seem better," he remarked one evening, eyes narrow with calculation. "I suppose I am," she said, sipping water she had poured herself. The tension between them stretched tight, invisible threads that hummed with each false gesture, each feigned kindness. He believed she was still under his control, still too weak to resist. She let him believe it, even as the truth piled up in files and hidden drives. The act was exhausting but necessary, because the longer she played the part, the clearer the endgame became. She wasn't just gathering proof of what he'd done. She was preparing to survive him. Julia waited until Michael had left for the office before dialing the number she hadn't touched in years. Her thumb hovered over the contact, Rebecca Carter, saved under the name Becky Foster, with an old photo from a reunion at 21. Back then, they'd been two girls laughing over coffee, proud they'd made it past the system without breaking. She pressed the call button before she could overthink it. "Julia!" The voice on the other end was warm, surprised. "It's been forever." Julia closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "I need to see you, Becky. It's urgent." Within an hour, they met at a small cafe near downtown. One Julia chose deliberately, a place Michael never visited, tucked between a bookstore and a tailor. The rain had let up, leaving the streets slick and reflective, neon signs bleeding across puddles. Julia slid into the booth across from her friend, and for a moment the years collapsed. Becky still had that determined glint in her hazel eyes, the same no-nonsense posture. "You look pale," Becky said immediately, reaching across the table. "What's going on?" Julia told her. Not everything at once. It came out in pieces, halting, but enough to draw Becky's brows tight with every word. The dizzy spells, the empty carton in the trash, the hidden camera, the footage of Michael pouring powder into her wine. By the time she finished, Julia's hands were trembling around her coffee cup. Becky's jaw clenched. That bastard. I knew I didn't like him. But this is attempted murder, Julia. You have to go to the police. I'm not ready, Julia whispered. I need more. If it's just one video, maybe he finds a way to explain it away. Twist it. He's good at that. He's persuasive. Becky leaned in. Then we get more. But you don't do it alone. Let me help. Julia hesitated, then nodded. Trust wasn't easy anymore. But Becky had once been the closest thing she had to family. Over the next few days, Becky put her words into action. She tailed Michael after work, her background in IT making her cautious, precise. She had a camera with a long lens and nerves of steel. Julia waited in her car one evening when Becky returned, sliding into the passenger seat with a tight expression. You were right to call me, Becky said, flipping through the photos on her camera. Look at this. The images were sharp despite the drizzle. Michael, in a tailored suit, walking into a cafe not with colleagues, but with a woman Julia recognized instantly, Vanessa Miller, an old acquaintance of his family's circle. In the photos, they were leaning too close across the table, his hand brushing hers, Vanessa's smile lingering with unmistakable intimacy. Later shots showed them exiting together, slipping into a boutique hotel on the corner. Julia stared until the screen blurred. Poisoning her wasn't enough. Michael had already replaced her in every other way. The betrayal layered itself like acid over old wounds. I thought maybe he was just detached, Julia said softly, her throat raw. That I wasn't enough. But this is deliberate. He wanted me gone so he could live openly with her. Becky's hand covered hers. Julia, listen to me. You need to protect yourself. Legally, financially, emotionally, everything. Because a man like that, he won't stop until he's sure you can't touch him. I've been collecting evidence, Julia admitted. Videos, files. I've hidden copies, but I don't know the next step. That's where I come in. Becky's tone hardened. I've got contacts, attorneys who specialize in domestic abuse cases. You need to start a paper trail. Bank statements, medical visits, that footage. If you move carefully, you can file for divorce with leverage. And you need to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Bags packed, money tucked away. Julia swallowed, thinking of the suitcase hidden at the back of her closet. I've already started. Good, because once he realizes you're not getting sicker, he'll escalate. You can't underestimate someone who's already tried to poison you. The words landed heavy, but they were necessary. Julia nodded, tears slipping free despite her resolve. Becky squeezed her hand. You're not alone this time, Becky said. He tried to isolate you, but I'm here, and I'll stay until you're out. Julia inhaled shakily, feeling the truth of it. For weeks, she had lived under a roof thick with suspicion and fear. But here, across from Becky, she felt a sliver of strength return. The evidence of Michael's affair was a knife in her chest, but it was also a weapon she could wield. He wasn't just a husband gone cold. He was a man who wanted her erased, body and name. And now she had proof of both his betrayal of her heart and his attempt on her life. The path ahead was terrifying, but at least it was clear. She would prepare, gather everything she needed, and when the moment came, she would not falter. Michael had written his own downfall, and Julia, with Becky by her side, would make sure the ending was hers to decide. Julia waited until the house was quiet enough to hear the clock tick in the hallway. Michael's car was in the driveway, his coat draped carelessly over the arm of the sofa. He was in his study, pouring a drink as though the world owed him one. Julia stood in the doorway, clutching a slim black folder against her chest. Her pulse drummed in her ears, but her voice, when she spoke, was calm. Michael, we need to talk. He turned, glass in hand, smile thin. If this is about dinner, order in. I've had a day. It's not about dinner. She stepped forward and set the folder on his desk. It's about this. He frowned, setting the glass aside, flipping the cover open. Inside were printed stills, grainy but clear, Michael tipping white powder into her wine, into her plate. Another set showed him arm in arm with Vanessa Miller, slipping into a hotel. His face drained of color, then tightened with contempt. What is this supposed to be? His laugh was brittle. Screenshots? Out of context pictures? You've lost your mind. It's video, Julia said evenly. Hours of it. Every packet, every glass you tampered with. And Becky followed you. She has the originals. The affair, the poisoning, it's all documented. He slammed the folder shut, eyes flashing. You ungrateful little parasite. I took you in, made you someone, and this is how you repay me? Sneaking around with cameras like some kind of spy. Julia's hands were steady now. You have two choices, Michael. You sign the divorce papers tonight, or I walk into a police station tomorrow morning with this evidence. Attempted murder is a felony. You'll lose everything. Your firm, your reputation, your freedom. His voice rose, venom lacing every syllable. You think anyone will believe you? You were nothing when I met you, just a girl with calluses from carrying plates. Without me, you'd still be scrubbing tables. Her throat tightened, but she didn't waver. Without you, I'd still be alive. That's the difference. For a moment, the mask cracked. He saw it, her certainty, her strength, the absolute lack of fear. His hand twitched toward the folder, then dropped. He sank into his chair, muttering under his breath, and reached for the pen she'd placed beside the papers. You'll regret this, he hissed as he scribbled his name. You think you can walk away clean? You'll never find another man like me. Julia gathered the signed pages, slid them into her bag, and looked him in the eye. That's the point. She left the study before he could spit another insult. Upstairs, she opened the closet and pulled the suitcase she'd packed days ago from the shadows. Essentials only, clothes, cash, copies of the evidence. She zipped it without hesitation. Her hand brushed the doorknob, and for the first time in weeks, the dizziness didn't come. The house smelled of his cologne, of expensive wood polish, of nights she had spent afraid. She paused in the doorway, then walked out without looking back. Outside, the rain had eased into a mist, softening the streetlights into halos. She loaded the suitcase into the trunk of her car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The tires whispered against the wet asphalt as she pulled away, the Dawson house shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just another shadow among many. Her chest loosened with every mile. She had proof. She had freedom. And she had survived him. The life ahead was unwritten, uncertain, but it was hers. For the first time in a long time, that was enough. The police precinct in downtown Portland smelled faintly of coffee gone stale, and the metallic tang of paperwork left too long under fluorescent light. Julia walked past the reception desk with her folder pressed tight against her ribs. The divorce papers now filed, but her mind still restless. She had called ahead, asked for Captain Leonard Cooper, and the receptionist had waved her through with the familiarity of someone used to survivors seeking refuge. Leo was waiting in his office, a space that bore the weight of 2 decades on the force. Commendations on the wall, a bookshelf crowded with law manuals and dog-eared paperbacks. Blinds tilted to block the glare of the gray afternoon. He stood as she entered, tall and broad, his hair flecked with silver. For a moment, he wasn't Captain Cooper, but the boy from the foster home who had once handed her a stolen cookie and promised he'd always have her back. "Julia," he said, pulling her into a brief embrace before gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "It's been a long time." She sat, smoothing her coat over her knees. "I wish it were under better circumstances. I read the message you sent, and Becky filled me in on the basics." His eyes hardened. "If what you've got on Michael is real, you've got enough to bury him legally." "It's real," Julia said firmly, "but that's not the only reason I came." She hesitated, then added, I want to know about my parents. Leo studied her for a long beat, then opened a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. I thought you might. He slid it across the desk. You deserve the truth. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The first page held a photograph she'd never seen. A man and woman in their 30s, smiling in front of a storefront with the name Dawson and Hale Sporting Goods stenciled on the window. Her mother's eyes were her own, bright and steady. Her father's jawline matched the one she glimpsed in mirrors. They were successful, Leo explained. Started small, built a chain across the Northwest. By the mid-90s, they were millionaires in everything but name. Good people, too, donated to schools, sponsored community centers. Everyone liked them, except maybe their business rivals. Julia flipped the page. The next image was harder to look at. A crumpled car beneath the sweep of emergency lights, metal folded in on itself like paper. They died when you were 9 months old, Leo said quietly. The official report listed it as a single-vehicle accident. Rain-slicked highway, faulty brakes. But there were inconsistencies. Brake lines looked tampered with. No signs of skid marks. My father, he was on the force then, pushed for an investigation, but it went nowhere. Her breath came shallow. And the Dawsons? They were close friends of your parents, Leo said, his voice edged with bitterness. Business partners. They stepped in fast, took over the company, claimed it was to protect the brand until you were of age. Your guardianship was shuffled through the system. By the time you hit 18, Dawson and Hale was just Dawson Sporting Goods. The Hale part, your family's part, vanished. Julia pressed her palm against the photo, as though she could feel warmth through the glossy paper. So it wasn't random. My whole life it was designed. Leo nodded grimly. When you married Michael, it wasn't some romantic accident. Agnes pushed for it. Think about it. Why would a wealthy family suddenly welcome a waitress from foster care into their home? Because it tied up the last loose end. You, the heiress, no one remembered. Marrying you to Michael kept any claim you might have to the fortune inside their bloodline. Her mind reeled back over the years. Agnes's polished smile, Michael's calculated courtship, the way the Dawsons had insisted on an elaborate wedding despite her modest wishes. It had all seemed like kindness then, an odd kind of generosity. Now she saw the strings, the invisible cage built around her. They killed them, she whispered, not as a question, but as a recognition. And then they caged me to keep what they stole. Leo's eyes softened, but his tone was steady. I can't prove they cut those brakes, not now. Too much time has passed, too much evidence lost. But I can prove this. You are the legal heir to what they built. And with the divorce finalized, you're free. Michael doesn't own you, and Agnes can't manipulate you anymore. Julia shut the folder and sat back, her breath unsteady. The betrayal stretched beyond marriage, vows, and poison wine. It reached into her bloodline, into the very absence of the parents she'd never known. What she had thought of as bad luck or fate had been something else entirely. A legacy stolen and a childhood manipulated to keep her blind. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain tapped the windows like insistent fingers. Finally, Julia lifted her chin. Then I'll reclaim it, not just for me, but for them. They deserve better than to be erased. Leo gave a slow nod. And you deserve a life that's yours, Julia. No more cages. She rose, tucking the folder into her bag. The weight was different now, not just evidence of a crime, but proof of who she truly was. As she stepped back into the damp Portland air, she no longer felt like a woman merely escaping her husband's betrayal. She was an heir walking out of the shadows of a stolen past, ready at last to claim what was rightfully hers. The courthouse steps gleamed with rain when Julia emerged, the decree in her hand. The divorce was final. Michael had signed under pressure from her attorney, who had presented the poisoning footage and Becky's photographs in tidy, devastating sequence. The settlement favored her heavily, a substantial payout, a share of investments Michael had hoped to hide, and the house she had already abandoned. He'd stormed out of the hearing red-faced, muttering threats, but the ink was dry now. She was free. For weeks after, she met with lawyers and bankers, signing papers that felt like chains falling away. And when all the numbers were settled, she did something Michael and Agnes would never have predicted. She walked back into the restaurant where she'd once balanced trays until her wrists ached. It looked the same, the broad windows fogged with steam, the faint scent of roasted garlic and coffee beans mingling in the air. The staff bustled, voices rising over the clatter of pans. For a moment she was 20 again, a girl in a borrowed uniform, wiping tables with aching feet and dreaming of something bigger. Then the manager appeared, hair thinning but posture rigid, a clipboard in his hand. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone brisk, almost dismissive. Julia smiled, setting a leather folder on the counter. "Actually, I'm your new employer." His mouth fell open. Behind him, a waitress nearly dropped her tray. Whispers rippled through the kitchen door. Julia slid the signed purchase papers toward him. "The sale. Closed this morning. Dawson money bought me cages. I'm using it to open doors instead." The shock gave way to astonishment. Staff members crowded near, peeking around corners. Someone gasped her name. "Julia?" "You worked here," a line cook said, wiping his hands on his apron. "I remember you. You were always racing 3 tables at once." "Yes," she said softly. "I used to dream about escaping this place, but maybe I just needed to return on my own terms." Over the next weeks, she transformed from ghost of a waitress into the woman at the helm. She kept the long-standing staff, surprising them with her fairness. Payroll arrived on time. Shift schedules were balanced to give everyone breathing room. She upgraded the coffee machine, invested in fresh linens, and repainted the dining room in warm earth tones that softened the sharp corners. But she wasn't indulgent. Julia had learned from Michael's world how authority could slip if it wasn't guarded. When a server came in late 3 days in a row, Julia pulled her aside, not to berate, but to warn. "This is a business. I'll always treat you with respect, but you need to meet me halfway." The young woman nodded, chastened, and the message spread through the staff. The new owner was kind, but not a pushover. For Julia, every decision stitched a new identity. She wasn't the trembling wife pretending to sip poisoned tea. She wasn't the orphan whose life had been orchestrated by others. She was a businesswoman, steady at the center of her own orbit. Sometimes customers recognized her. A couple who had dined here years ago whispered to their server, "Wasn't she the Dawson wife? The one who disappeared?" Julia met their curious gazes with a polite smile, never offering explanations. The rumors would swirl, but she didn't owe anyone her story. One evening, after closing, she stood in the dining room alone. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed to a low glow. She traced her hand along the polished bar where she used to wipe spills, where Michael once came to impress his colleagues while she carried plates in the background. Now she owned the ledger, the liquor license, the mortgage. Her name was on every document. Becky stopped by that night, sliding onto a bar stool with a grin. "You did it," she said. "From poison wine to owning the whole place." Julia poured them both a glass of sparkling water and raised hers. "To survival," she said. "No," Becky corrected gently, clinking glasses. "To living." The carbonation fizzed against Julia's lips, crisp and clean. She set the glass down and looked around the room, hearing not the clatter of old memories but the hum of possibility. For the first time in years, she felt whole. She wasn't defined by what had been taken from her. She was defined by what she had built and what she would build next. The restaurant would open again tomorrow at 9 sharp. Julia Dawson, once a waitress, now the owner, would be there at the door, not to serve out of necessity, but to welcome on her own terms. The shift was complete. She had become the woman her parents might have dreamed she'd be. strong, unshaken, and undeniably her own. The cemetery was quiet that afternoon, the sky heavy with low clouds that pressed the air into silence. Julia carried a small bouquet of lilies, her steps deliberate on the gravel path that wound between rows of slate headstones. She had been here only once before, years ago, when Leo first told her the truth about her parents. Now, with her life her own again, she felt drawn back to honor them, but also to speak aloud what she had finally reclaimed. She knelt before the Dawson and Hale plot where her mother and father's names were etched. She set the lilies gently, tracing the carved letters with her fingertips. "I know now," she whispered, voice barely rising above the rustle of the breeze. "They thought they could erase you. They tried to erase me, too. But I'm still here, and I'll carry what was yours forward." A sound startled her, sniffling, soft and uneven. She turned to see a boy of maybe 9 sitting on a nearby bench, his arms hugged around his knees. His clothes were rumpled, his sneakers caked with dried mud. "Hey," Julia said carefully, rising to her feet. "Are you okay?" The boy swiped at his face, but didn't answer. His shoulders shook once, betraying him. Julia walked closer, leaving a respectful distance. "My name's Julia. I was just visiting my parents." "Who are you here for?" He hesitated, then muttered, "My mom. She's not here, but I wish she was." His small voice cracked. "I got stuck with a stepmom instead." Julia sat on the bench's far end, her heart tightening. "That sounds hard." "She hates me," he blurted. "Always yelling, telling me I'm useless. Dad works out of town, so he doesn't see. He thinks she's nice." "What's your name?" Julia asked softly. "Ethan." He looked up, eyes wide and red-rimmed. Something in Julia's chest shifted. She remembered being his age, shuffled through foster homes, feeling unwanted, powerless. "Ethan, no one deserves to be treated that way. Does your dad know?" He shook his head fiercely. "If I tell him, she'll just make it worse." Julia's hand itched to reach for his, but she held back, sensing his wariness. "Do you have somewhere safe to go today?" He shrugged. "I was just walking. Didn't want to go home yet." The decision came easily. "Why don't you come with me? Just for today. I own a restaurant now. You can have something warm to eat, and we'll figure things out together." Ethan's gaze flickered with uncertainty, then relief. He nodded. At the restaurant, Julia settled him at a corner booth, sliding a plate of pasta in front of him. He devoured it like someone who couldn't be sure of the next meal. She didn't press with questions, just let him eat, her chest tightening with every hurried bite. Over the next week, Ethan slipped into her life in quiet ways. He did his homework at the bar after school, helped fold napkins with the staff, even followed her into the office once, fascinated by the idea of being the boss. Julia found herself smiling more than she had in months. He wasn't just company, he was a reminder of resilience, of how children adapt even under cruelty. When Alex Johnson finally returned from a construction job in Eastern Oregon, he stormed into the restaurant with worry etched across his face. Julia recognized him immediately. Tall, sun-browned, hands calloused, eyes scanning the room like a man searching for his world. When he saw Ethan at a booth, safe and eating, his shoulders sagged with relief. "Ethan," he said, kneeling to embrace his son. "I've been looking everywhere. What happened?" The boy clung to him, whispering into his shirt. Julia stood back, giving them space, but Alex soon turned to her. "You're Julia?" he asked. "Yes." He was alone at the cemetery. "I couldn't leave him." Alex's expression softened into gratitude. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." Julia hesitated, then said he told me about how things are when you're away. Alex's face darkened. "I've had suspicions. I work long jobs, weeks at a time. I thought she was managing, but I should have listened better." He looked at Ethan again, his jaw set. "That ends now." Respect stirred between them in that moment. Mutual understanding forged from scars. Julia saw not just a weary construction worker, but a father determined to protect his son. Alex saw not just a stranger, but a woman who had offered kindness when his child needed it most. Over the following days, Alex returned often, sometimes with Ethan in tow, sometimes alone. They spoke over coffee after closing, sharing stories of hardship and small victories. Julia told him pieces of her past, enough to explain why she had opened her doors to Ethan so easily. Alex listened without judgment, his steady presence grounding her. Affection grew quietly, not in grand gestures, but in simple moments. Ethan laughing in the kitchen while Julia baked, Alex fixing a loose hinge on the restaurant door without being asked, Julia catching his eyes lingering on her when he thought she wasn't looking. It wasn't love yet, not fully, but it was something truer. Respect, trust, and the faint beginning of belonging. For Julia, it was the first time in years she felt like she was building a life not just for herself, but with others beside her. And for Ethan, it was the first time in a long while he felt wanted, not as a burden, but as someone worth protecting. Spring arrived in Portland with soft rains and trees budding along the sidewalks, a gentler season than the one Julia had survived. The restaurant thrived under her leadership, but her greatest transformation came quietly without fanfare. One morning, in a courthouse far simpler than the one where her divorce had been finalized, Julia Dawson became Julia Johnson. She and Alex had chosen a ceremony with only Ethan, Becky, and Leo present, family by bond rather than blood. No lavish gowns, no photographers, just vows spoken with sincerity, hands clasped firmly together, the knowledge that this time love was built on respect instead of control. Weeks later, Julia sat in the dim glow of an ultrasound room, Alex's hand enveloping hers. The monitor flickered with fuzzy images, and then the technician smiled. 2 heartbeats, she said. Congratulations, you're having twins. Julia blinked against tears. 2 lives fluttering within her. A future she had once believed poisoned away. Alex kissed her temple, his voice hushed. They'll never know the kind of fear you went through. We'll make sure of that. Meanwhile, the Dawsons' empire crumbled. Michael, stripped by the settlement and further lawsuits, lost his firm to scandal. Clients fled when whispers of attempted poisoning reached the press. Rumors Julia never confirmed but never denied either. Agnes, her once impeccable image tarnished, found doors closing in the social circles she once ruled. Friends stopped calling. Charities rejected her. The Dawson name, once synonymous with wealth, became a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. They lived now in a smaller house, shadows of their former selves, blaming each other for their downfall. Julia never visited them, never sought a confrontation. She didn't need to. Their collapse was punishment enough, a slow exile into irrelevance. She had discovered that revenge wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet decay of those who had built their lives on manipulation. On a gray Sunday afternoon, Julia returned to the cemetery, this time with roses instead of lilies. She knelt before her parents' graves, her growing belly pressing gently against her dress, and laid the blooms with steady hands. I found my way back, she whispered. They tried to erase us, but we're still here. Your names, your legacy live on through me. She felt Ethan's small hand slip into hers, grounding her. He had insisted on coming. Now a boy who laughed more easily, his eyes brighter with safety. Alex stood behind them, solid and reassuring, his presence a quiet promise of permanence. Julia rose, brushing her fingertips once more over the carved letters of her parents' names. She didn't feel sorrow this time. She felt rooted, connected, strong. She turned to her family, the one she had chosen, the one she had built, and smiled. As they walked back toward the car, rain began to fall, light and refreshing, washing the stone clean. Julia tilted her face to the sky, unafraid. She knew now that truth and resilience outweighed all the wealth and schemes the Dawsons had wielded against her. Justice hadn't arrived in a gavel slam or in shouted accusations. It had arrived slowly, enduringly, in the life she had claimed back piece by piece. And as the roses soaked in the rain, her parents' memory stood taller than any empire Agnes or Michael had stolen. Julia Dawson, once a waitress, once a pawn in their games, had become Julia Johnson, a woman who had survived, rebuilt, and triumphed. And her revenge was the sweetest kind, not destruction, but the life they could never take from her again.
The world keeps turning, and with each turn comes a new story. When one door closes, another opens, leading us into a journey entirely different. Let us set aside the echoes of the tale just past and step together into a new realm where another destiny awaits to be told. And now I invite you to listen to the second story, a path of its own, unrelated to what came before, yet filled with mysteries and surprises meant only for those willing to journey onward with me.
I hadn't seen Willow Bay in almost 10 years, but the moment the bus pulled up to the old gas station on Main Street, I knew nothing had changed, except me. The windows were fogged from the cold, but I could still make out the outline of the library, the church steeple, and the rusted "Welcome to Willow Bay" sign that had always hung crooked. The same potholes scarred the road, and the air smelled like salt and pine needles. For a second, I could almost believe I was 17 again, back from a school trip, except I wasn't. I was 26, pregnant, alone, and carrying everything I owned in a backpack and a second-hand duffel. The driver gave me a long look as I stepped off. "You sure this is your stop, sweetheart?" His eyes flicked to my stomach, not quite showing yet under the layers of my coat, but I guess some things are hard to hide. I nodded. "Yeah, this is it." He didn't say anything else, just closed the doors and pulled away, leaving me standing on the gravel shoulder, shivering in the wind. I stood there for a moment, hands tucked deep in my coat pockets, staring at the street ahead of me. The last place on earth I wanted to return to, and the only place I had left. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was going to graduate, get my degree in literature, maybe teach in Boston or Portland. I was going to fall in love the right way, have a baby the right way, with a partner who didn't suddenly decide he wasn't ready. But that fantasy had ended 3 months ago on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Kirill, yes, that was really his name, looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't what I want, Sarah." He had offered money, a check I never cashed. I left his apartment that night with my coat soaked through and a lump in my throat the size of Maine itself. I had nowhere else to go. My mother died when I was 6. I never knew my father. My Aunt Eleanor was the only family I had, and we hadn't spoken in years. But when you're pregnant, broke, and 2 weeks from homelessness, pride isn't something you get to keep. Her porch light was off when I climbed the wooden steps. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Finally, the door creaked open just a few inches, revealing the same sharp face I remembered from childhood, only older, colder. She didn't even pretend to smile. "Well, look what the storm dragged in," she said, eyeing my stomach. I suppose the rumors were true. I tried to speak, tried to explain that I wasn't asking for much, just a couch for a few weeks, maybe a warm meal. "You can't stay here, Sarah. I have a reputation in this town. I'm a retired teacher. A single girl with a belly isn't the kind of attention I need." Her voice was crisp, practiced, as if she had rehearsed this. "But I'm family," I whispered. "No, you were a burden. And I warned you before you ran off to college with all your poetry books and big dreams. This world eats girls like you alive." She shut the door before I could answer. I stood there on the porch, shaking, not sure if it was from the wind or from the rage rising up my spine. I should have cried. I didn't. I just turned and walked down the steps, past the flower beds she used to weed with surgical precision, past the gravel path lined with garden gnomes. I kept walking until my legs ached, until the wind had sliced through every layer of clothing I had. By the time I saw the wooden gate and the house behind it, small, weather-beaten, but with lights on inside, I was half delirious with cold. I didn't even knock. I just leaned over the gate and called out, "Hello? I'm sorry, does anyone have water? I'll pay, please." A voice called back, firm but not unkind. Water doesn't cost anything in this house. The door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. Her hair was silver and pinned up. She wore a quilted robe and slippers, but something about her posture reminded me of someone who used to give orders for a living. She looked me up and down, her eyes resting on my face, then my stomach, then the tears I didn't realize had finally begun to fall. "You're not from around here," she said. "Actually, I am," I whispered. "My name's Sarah Whitman. I used to live on Rose Street. My aunt's Eleanor Whitman." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Eleanor, of course." She opened the gate and nodded toward the warm light behind her. "Come inside, then. You look like you're about to collapse." I hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "Oh, honey," she said, almost chuckling. "You already have. But lucky for you, I don't mind." That night, I slept in a stranger's house, in a room that smelled like apples and old books, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. The woman's name was Hazel Whitmore, and as I would learn later, she had once been a high school biology teacher, the kind who terrified students into remembering the periodic table for life. Her house sat on a gentle slope overlooking the bay, surrounded by gnarled apple trees that still held the scent of autumn even in early winter. Inside, it smelled of cinnamon, tea leaves, and something else I couldn't quite place, like the past refusing to fade. The morning after she let me in, Hazel poured me a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and said, "If you're staying here, you'll earn your keep. I'm too old to shovel snow and chase squirrels off the porch. Think you can manage that with a baby on board?" "I can manage," I said, and I meant it. That same week, I took the town bus, an old yellow school bus they repurposed, to the district office and applied for a teaching position. The woman behind the desk looked up when I walked in, her eyes pausing for a beat too long on the slight swell of my stomach beneath my sweater. "You're the Whitman girl," she said. "Not a question. Just fact." I nodded. "Sarah Whitman. I had just finished my degree. English, literature." "Didn't you go off to college?" she asked, as if it was a betrayal. "I graduated. I'm looking for work." She flipped through a stack of folders with long, manicured nails that clicked like metronomes. "Zion Ridge Middle School needs a substitute for 8th grade literature. Temporary. Starts Monday. You want it?" I said yes before she even finished the sentence. Monday morning, I stood in front of a class of 13-year-olds who stared at me like I was a zoo exhibit. I wore my best thrift store cardigan, the one without any missing buttons, and wrote my name on the board in block letters. Ms. Whitman. One of the boys raised his hand. "Are you, like, pregnant?" The room went still. I paused for half a breath. "Yes," I said. "Now open your books. We're reading of mice and men." That first week was brutal. The kids tested me every day, side whispers, gum stuck under desks, eye rolls, bold sarcasm. I went home sore, exhausted, and doubting myself more than I'd ever admit. But every evening, Hazel would be waiting with a warm bowl of stew or apple pie she claimed was nothing special, even though it was always exactly what I needed. She never pried, never asked about the baby's father, never made me feel like a charity case. Instead, she handed me a list of chores, told me which days to refill the bird feeder and which plants needed trimming in the greenhouse, and said, "Idle hands make for anxious hearts, Sarah, and I reckon you've had enough of that." One night, about 2 weeks in, I found her sitting by the fireplace holding a faded photo of a young man in uniform. "My son," she said before I could ask, "killed overseas. He was 22. I didn't know what to say, just sat beside her and let the silence do the talking. The next morning, she handed me a spare set of keys and muttered, "Just in case you come home later than me, not that I'm waiting up." In the quiet moments, grading essays by lamplight, stirring soup on the stovetop, folding baby clothes I'd found at Goodwill, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Calm. Not peace, not yet, but calm. A stillness inside me that wasn't fear or dread. One evening, after class, I walked past the teacher's lounge and heard my name. That new girl, Whitman. Already knocked up. Town always attracts strays, someone said, followed by low laughter. I didn't stop. I didn't cry. I just walked right past them and out the door into the cold, into the dark that smelled like salt water and frozen earth, and I breathed because I had somewhere to go. Because for the first time in a long time I wasn't lost. Hazel's porch light was glowing. The smoke from her chimney curled into the night sky like a signpost. And when I stepped inside, her voice called from the kitchen, "You hungry?" I was. But more than that, I was home. It started with the wind. Not the kind that rattles a few windows or tosses a leaf across the porch, but the kind that howls like something alive. That week, the news had warned of a nor'easter blowing in, the kind that shuts down the coastal roads and knocks out power lines across half of Maine. But I wasn't worried about the storm. I was focused on making it through the next few weeks without going into labor. The baby wasn't due for another 10 days. It was late January. The snow had been falling all day, quiet and thick, blanketing Willow Bay in silence. Hazel had made shepherd's pie for dinner and insisted I eat 2 servings. "You're eating for 2," she said, "and one of you looks like he's already stealing your spine." We laughed. It was the first time in days that I'd felt light again. For a moment, I believed I'd make it through the rest of the pregnancy without drama, without chaos, without pain. I went to bed around 9. The house creaked and groaned in the wind, but it felt warm, safe. I curled up under 3 layers of quilts and closed my eyes. The pain hit at 2:12 a.m. Not a cramp, not pressure. This was something else. Sharp, deep. I bolted upright, gasping, one hand clutching the edge of the mattress, the other on my belly. Then came the second wave. My breath caught in my throat. I swung my legs over the bed and stood, but my knees buckled and I grabbed the dresser to keep from falling. "Not now," I whispered. "Please, not now." Then my water broke. I shuffled down the hall, barefoot and panicked, leaving a trail behind me on the wooden floor. I knocked on Hazel's door, too gently at first. No answer. I knocked again, harder. She opened the door within seconds, hair tousled, eyes wide. She took one look at me and said, "Damn it." "We need to get to the hospital," I choked out. "I know," she said, already grabbing her coat. "Shoes. You need shoes." The power had gone out sometime during the night. The wind screamed outside, snow swirling so thick we could barely see the end of the porch. Hazel grabbed her flashlight and her old flip phone. "No signal. Landline's dead," she muttered. "Cell towers probably down. Stay put." She ran to the neighbor's house. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the storm like a lifeline. The old blue pickup belonged to Pops Peterson, Hazel's grumpy, widowed neighbor, a former cab driver now pushing 70 with a permanent scowl and a soft spot for stray animals, and apparently for heavily pregnant girls in blizzards. He shouted over the wind as he helped me into the passenger seat. "Hang on tight, sweetheart. Got 5 births under my belt already. You'll be number 6 if we don't hit a tree." I could barely reply. Every contraction came like a wave crashing into my spine. Hazel climbed in beside me, holding my hand, murmuring words I couldn't hear but desperately needed. Her grip was warm, solid, anchoring me to the world. The drive was a blur of headlights, snow, and potholes. Pops cursed every other word but kept the wheel steady. I focused on breathing, counting between contractions, trying not to scream. When I couldn't hold it in anymore, Hazel just said, "Let it out, Sarah. Let it out." When we reached the hospital, a nurse rushed out with a wheelchair. They rolled me inside while Hazel stayed to argue with the front desk about emergency protocols. The nurse's voice was calm and sharp. "How far apart are your contractions?" 2 minutes, I gasped. "Maybe less." "You're ready," she said, almost too calmly. "Let's go." They wheeled me down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. The lights flickered. My world narrowed to pain and breathing and pushing. 6 hours later, I heard a cry so loud and fierce it cracked through every cell in my body. They placed him on my chest, tiny, red-faced, angry at the world. And in that moment, the pain evaporated. He blinked up at me, fists curled tight. "My son." "Jack," I whispered. "Hi, baby. I'm your mama." I didn't cry until later. Not when he was born. Not when they cleaned him or stitched me up. But when they took him to the nursery for checks, and I was left alone in the silence of the recovery room, that's when it hit me. I had done it. Not the easy way, not the right way, but my way. And then through the thin wall to the room next door, I heard it. Not a baby crying, but a woman, sobbing, desperate, fractured. And I had no idea that her pain would soon become part of my story too. They brought Jack back to me just before sunrise, bundled tightly in a blue-striped blanket, his face pink and peaceful. He latched again like he'd been doing it his whole life, stubborn and hungry. "You've got lungs like a prize fighter," I whispered, brushing a finger along his cheek. "You're going to be just fine." But I couldn't stop thinking about the crying from the room next door. It was a sound that clung to me, even in moments of joy, like a question I wasn't supposed to ask. Later that morning, a nurse came in, the same one who'd helped deliver Jack. Her name tag read Lisa, RN. She was probably in her mid-40s, hair pulled into a bun that had given up halfway through the night. She smiled at Jack, then glanced around like she didn't want anyone else to hear. "You doing okay?" I nodded. "We're good." She hesitated. "I shouldn't tell you this, but the baby next door, she's not doing well. The mother left, just vanished, left a note and everything." I felt my stomach tighten. "The baby's alone. She was born premature, tiny, lungs aren't strong. She's not taking formula, not responding well to 4. It's not looking great." Lisa sighed and sat on the edge of my bed. "They named her Ava. Her dad's been sitting by her crib all night. Hasn't said a word." "Where's the mom?" "No idea. She was gone before we even checked her vitals. Said she wasn't ready to be a parent to a sick baby." Her voice cracked on the last 2 words. I looked down at Jack. He was fast asleep now, his little hand curled around the collar of my gown. "Can I see her?" I asked quietly. Lisa blinked. "Ava, I just want to see her." She didn't answer right away. Then, after a moment, she stood. "I'll check with the NICU, but don't get your hopes up." An hour later, they wheeled me into a quiet room with machines that beeped in slow, uncertain rhythms. In the middle was a plastic bassinet, and inside it a bundle so small, so fragile I almost missed her. Ava. She looked like she'd been folded out of paper. Translucent skin. Eyelids so thin I could see the blue of her veins. Her breath came in shallow pulls. Lips barely parting. Her fists never curled. Her chest barely moved. "She won't eat," Lisa said beside me, soft as snow. "She won't take the bottle. We've tried everything." I didn't ask permission. I just held out my arms. They placed her against my chest, and I waited. At first, nothing. But then, just barely, her head turned, her mouth opened, and her lips brushed against my skin. And she latched. Lisa gasped. "Oh my God, she's eating." Tears burned my eyes. I didn't speak, didn't move. I just stared at her, this tiny, unwanted life clinging to me as if I were the only thing she had left. And maybe I was. For the next hour, I fed both babies. Jack first, then Ava. They took turns without complaint. 2 little heartbeats. 2 warm weights pressed against me like promises I hadn't expected to make. Later, I heard footsteps at the door. I looked up and saw a man. Tall, early 30s, pale from exhaustion. Officer's jacket unzipped. Snow still melting off his boots. His eyes went straight to the baby in my arms. His baby. "You're feeding her?" he asked, voice rough from not speaking. Yes, I said simply. He stepped forward slowly, like he didn't trust the floor beneath him. I'm Daniel, he said. Ava's father. I nodded. I'm Sarah, Jack's mom. He looked at Ava again, then at Jack in the crib beside us. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the bassinet. I didn't know what to do, he whispered. She just left. I thought I'd lose her too. You won't, I said. Not if we keep her warm. Keep her fed. Keep her loved. And for the first time, he believed me. After that day, everything changed, quietly at first. Jack and I were discharged 2 days later. My arms ached from holding him. My stitches pulled every time I moved, but none of that mattered, because I couldn't stop thinking about Ava, about her tiny lips parting in hunger, about how her body melted into mine like she belonged there as much as Jack did. Daniel called me the next evening. Hazel and I were sitting in the kitchen when the old landline rang, a sound I hadn't heard in years. She handed it to me with a raised brow. Guy with a deep voice, she mouthed. Didn't say his name. I pressed the receiver to my ear. Hello. It's Daniel. From the hospital. My heart thudded once. How's Ava? She's better. They're keeping her another week. But the nurses said she's eating more now. Gaining weight. Good, I said, relieved. I think it's because of you, he added. There was silence on the line. Not uncomfortable, just full. I know it's a lot to ask, he said, but would you come back? Just for feedings, until she's strong enough. They said formula still doesn't work. I didn't hesitate. Of course. So for the next 7 days, I rode to the hospital every morning and every evening, Hazel watching Jack while I took that familiar drive to the NICU. The nurses began calling me Mama too. I pretended not to love it. Daniel would be waiting most days, awkward in the beginning, hovering in the corners. But every time I handed Ava over to him, his arms got steadier. One morning, I came home to find Hazel in the garden with Jack strapped to her chest in a makeshift sling she fashioned out of a curtain. You're turning me into a grandmother, she muttered, pulling weeds. And I haven't even yelled at you properly yet. But I could see it, the way she kissed the top of Jack's head when she thought no one was looking. The way her hands always reached for him before her words did. By the end of that week, Ava was strong enough to come home. Daniel stood on my porch that afternoon. Snow in his hair, Ava bundled in his arms. I need help, he said, voice raw. I live in a service house out near the edge of town. It's just me. The nights are long, and she sleeps best after you feed her. I stared at him, trying to read the lines between his words. This wasn't a proposal. It wasn't romance. It was need, honest and stripped down. I can pay you, he added quickly. You and Jack would have your own room. I'm not asking for anything more than help. You don't need to pay me, I said. Yes, I do, he said, because I don't want to owe you kindness. That part I understood. Hazel helped me pack. You're not running off, she warned. You're helping someone breathe. Just don't forget how to breathe yourself. Daniel's house sat on a hill overlooking the bay, smaller than Hazel's, but just as old. It had 3 rooms and a porch that faced the water. The walls smelled like cedar. The windows fogged up when the kettle boiled. And there was peace in the way it felt lived in and unfinished. He gave Jack and me the biggest room. Ava's crib stayed in his. We didn't speak much those first few days. He worked long shifts. I stayed home with the babies. We moved around each other like ghosts. But some nights, after the babies were fed and the silence settled, I'd find him on the porch, arms crossed, eyes on the dark horizon. You don't have to sit out here alone, I said once. I do, he replied, but thank you. That was the thing about Daniel. He didn't say much, but when he did, you felt it all. In those quiet weeks, we built something without realizing. A rhythm, a home, 2 babies, 2 people who didn't ask for this, but who showed up anyway. And somehow that was enough. February passed like a dream that tiptoed through snow. Slow mornings, the scent of formula and oatmeal. the soft rustle of diapers and lullabies humming through cold window panes. I found myself memorizing Ava's breathing, the way she curled her toes when startled, the sound Jack made when he laughed in his sleep. Daniel was always moving, shoveling the path, chopping wood, fixing the creaky steps on the porch. He never sat still unless Ava was asleep on his chest. Some nights, I'd peek into the living room and find them there, him in the armchair, her heartbeat steady against his, both of them drifting somewhere between exhaustion and peace. We didn't talk about the past. Not his, not mine. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore. It was a kind of sanctuary, a place to rest without being asked to explain. But there were moments. One night, the heater broke during a storm. We huddled in the living room with both babies pressed between us, wrapped in layers of blankets. Daniel handed me a mug of instant cocoa, his fingers brushing mine for a second too long. I used to think I knew what strong meant, he said quietly. Muscles, orders, saving people from drowning. I watched him through the flicker of candlelight. But then Vanessa left, he continued, and I was holding this tiny thing with a feeding tube and no mom, and I realized strong is staying when you're scared out of your mind. He looked at me then, really looked at me. That's what you did, isn't it? Stayed, even when you didn't have to. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Maybe I didn't have anywhere else to go. He shook his head. You could have gone back to the city, found your old life, a real job, someone else. I smiled faintly. Someone else wouldn't understand. The words hung between us like fog, warm and soft, impossible to hold. That night, we slept side by side on the living room floor, not touching, not speaking, just breathing together in the dark, two adults orbiting around the quiet gravity of two children who had no idea how broken we were trying not to be. Spring came reluctantly to Willow Bay. Patches of grass peeked through the snow, and crocuses fought their way up through frozen soil. Daniel returned to work, full-time with the Coast Guard. I found a part-time job at the local library, cataloging books and reading stories to toddlers every Tuesday. Hazel came by once a week to fuss over Jack and scold me for never eating enough. You look like a candle, she muttered, putting more mashed potatoes on my plate than I could finish. Ava learned to smile in April. It was crooked at first, like she was still deciding if the world was worth trusting. But when she looked at Daniel, her whole face lit up. Jack learned to crawl in May. I caught him trying to climb into Ava's crib one morning, his chubby hands gripping the bars with determination. She reached up and grabbed his hair. Neither of them cried. One Sunday, we took a walk down by the bay. Daniel pushed Ava in the stroller while I carried Jack in a sling against my chest. The tide was low, and we stopped to watch the boats rock gently at the dock. I don't know what this is, Daniel said, eyes still on the water, but I don't want to lose it. I said nothing, just slipped my fingers into his. He didn't let go. That night, after the babies were asleep, he kissed me for the first time. No music, no fireworks, just a quiet moment in the kitchen while the dishwasher hummed and the world outside was finally still. And that was the night I realized something terrifying. I was happy, not performative, not distracted, not numb, just happy, which is usually the moment life decides to test you. It came in a plain, white envelope. No return address. Just my name, Sarah Whitman, scrawled in sharp black ink like it had something to prove. Daniel handed it to me on a Tuesday morning while I was making pancakes. This was in the mailbox, he said. Looks personal. I turned it over. My hands froze. I knew that handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the counter, next to Jack's sippy cup and a half-eaten banana. I finished cooking. We ate breakfast. We dressed the babies. We folded laundry. But the envelope never stopped staring at me. Finally, during nap time, I sat on the porch and peeled it open. Sarah, it began. I heard you're back in Willow Bay. I don't know if you'll even read this, but I needed to say something. I made a mistake, a big one. I was scared and selfish, and I know I hurt you. But I can't stop thinking about you, about the baby. Is he mine? I stopped breathing. I want to talk. Please. I've been working on myself. I'm not the guy I was in Boston. I want to meet my son, if he is my son. I deserve that much. Don't I? Liam, I read it again. Then a third time. The words didn't change. The weight in my chest didn't lighten. Liam. The man who vanished the second I told him I was pregnant. The man who blocked my number, ghosted me, and never once checked if I was alive or dead. Now he wanted to talk. I went inside. Daniel was on the couch, Ava asleep on his shoulder, his eyes watching me like he already knew. Bad news, he asked. I handed him the letter. He read it in silence. No expression. No questions. Then, softly, are you going to respond? I don't know, I whispered. Do I owe him that? Daniel didn't answer. He just looked at Ava, then at Jack sleeping in the bassinet beside the couch. Whatever you decide, he said slowly. Just promise me you won't let guilt make the choice. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the letter tucked under my pillow like a curse I couldn't shake. What if Liam came to town? What if he demanded custody? What if he used the law like a weapon? What if he was right? Did Jack deserve to know his biological father? Would he hate me one day for keeping the truth from him? I sat in the rocking chair, watching my son breathe, his chest rising and falling, his little hands curled into fists. I didn't have answers, only fears. A week passed, then two. I didn't write back. Then one morning, Hazel showed up unannounced, carrying a lemon pie and an envelope. You got another letter, she said, face unreadable. But this one isn't from Boston. I opened it slowly. Sarah, this is Eleanor. I know we haven't spoken since you came back. And I know I said things I can't take back. But I heard what you've been doing. The town's talking. About you. About the babies. And I'm sorry. You're not the failure I thought you'd be. You're braver than I ever was. If you ever want to talk, my door's open. Always. My throat tightened. Eleanor, the aunt who kicked me out when I told her I was pregnant. The woman who made me believe I'd ruin my life. And now this. I handed the letter to Daniel. He read it, then folded it neatly and placed it beside the first one. Looks like the world's trying to crawl back in, he said. Guess it realized what it lost. I looked at him, at Ava, at Jack, at the house that had become our home. I wasn't the same girl who showed up at Hazel's door that snowy night. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't owe anyone anything. I stood at the edge of Willow Bay, watching the tide pull back from the rocks. The wind curled around my coat, cold and damp, carrying with it the sharp scent of seaweed and salt and something older than both. Behind me, the town was waking up. But inside me, something had already shifted. I had two letters, two ghosts. Liam's full of guilt and demands, and a rewritten version of the past where he wasn't a coward. And Eleanor's shorter, softer, but laced with regret from years too late. Both of them wanted access to a version of me I no longer was. I knew I needed to choose who to answer, who to forgive, who to let go. So I wrote two letters of my own. To Eleanor I said, I appreciate your words. I really do. But forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's a hallway you crawl through, and I'm still on my knees. I'm not ready to see you yet, but I'll let you know when I am. To Liam, I wrote only this. Jack already has a father, one who stayed. I never mailed them, but I didn't need to. The moment I sealed those envelopes, the decision settled in my bones like heat after a long winter. I was done carrying what didn't belong to me. That weekend, Daniel surprised me with a picnic on the cliffs behind the house. The sky was the color of old denim, and the air smelled like lilacs. We sat on a blanket, Ava gurgling between us, Jack trying to eat a pine cone. You okay? Daniel asked, watching me like he always did, with that quiet intensity that made it hard to lie. I nodded. Yeah, I think I am. You seem lighter. I am. He leaned back on his elbows. You ever think about leaving? Leaving what? This town. The house. All of it. I thought about it. The Sarah from a year ago would have packed a bag without looking back. But now, not anymore, I said. This is where Jack took his first step, where Ava found her laugh, where I remembered how to breathe. Daniel smiled. Good, because I bought something. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny black box. For a moment, the world tilted. I'm not asking today, he said quickly. I know you're not there yet, but someday, maybe. I opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring. It was a silver locket. Inside, 2 tiny photos. Jack, Ava, I wanted you to have something that proves we're already a family. Even before the paperwork, the promises, the words. I couldn't speak. My throat closed around something too big to name. So I leaned forward, kissed him once, soft, certain, and whispered, Someday isn't as far off as you think. That night, I tucked Jack into bed and sat with Ava until her breath evened out. Then I slipped the locket over my neck, its weight grounding me like roots under frozen soil. The next morning, I went to the post office and mailed only 1 letter. To myself. You did it. You survived. You loved. You let go. You grew something beautiful from the ashes. And that is enough. No return address. Just my name, Sarah Whitman, written in my own hand. The first time I ever stood on that porch, I was shaking, pregnant, scared and soaked from the rain. I remember thinking the house looked like it didn't want me there. The shutters hung crooked. The steps groaned like old bones. It was never meant to be home, just a place to hide while I figured out how to survive. But a year later, that same porch held different sounds. Jack's laugh, Ava's cooing, the soft click of Daniel's coffee mug beside mine on crisp mornings. The house didn't just shelter me anymore. It saw me. I wasn't hiding. I was rooted. Spring had come early that year. The orchard behind the house bloomed in thick clusters of white petals. Jack helped Daniel plant vegetables in the garden, though most of his help meant flinging dirt onto Daniel's jeans and laughing until he fell over. Ava had started to crawl, dragging herself across the floor like a tiny explorer determined to conquer every rug and shoelace. And I had started writing again. Real writing. Not just grocery lists or angry letters never sent. I turned the spare room into an office, dusted off my old laptop, and began shaping the pieces of my story into something more than memory. One afternoon, as I edited a chapter about Eleanor's cold silences, the doorbell rang. It was her. She stood at the gate in a simple coat, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the gravel path. No accusations, no tears, just 2 women with too much past and not enough future to waste it. I opened the gate. She didn't step in. I won't stay, she said, voice trembling like the stems in her hands. I just wanted to say thank you. For the letter. For not hating me. I did hate you, I answered quietly. For a long time. But hate is heavy, and I've been carrying too much. She nodded. I'm proud of you, Sarah. And then she left. It wasn't dramatic. No hugs, no sobbing forgiveness. But it was real. And sometimes that's enough. 2 weeks later, I got a message from Liam. Not an apology this time. Just a photo, he and his new girlfriend, standing beside a stroller. This is Mia, he wrote. Thought you should know Jack has a sister. If you ever want them to meet. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Jack didn't need more confusion. He needed consistency, safety, love. He already had all 3. That night, I told Daniel everything. About the message. The photo. My choice. He didn't ask questions. Just kissed my temple and said, You did the right thing. By the end of summer, the house had transformed. We painted the porch, repaired the shutters, strung fairy lights along the fence. I filled the kitchen with herbs from the garden and laughter from our new friends. Logan and Sierra came over often. bringing pies and stories and advice on how to get Jack to eat broccoli without theatrics. And on a warm September morning, I opened the mailbox and found a thick envelope from a small publishing press in Portland. They wanted to buy my manuscript, the story of a woman who lost everything and found something better. I cried right there, barefoot in the driveway, Ava on my hip, Jack tugging at my jeans asking for juice. Later that week, I signed the contract on the same table where I used to cry myself to sleep. We celebrated with strawberry shortcake and cheap champagne. Jack spilled whipped cream on Daniel's lap. Ava grabbed a handful of frosting and smeared it in her own hair. I laughed until I couldn't breathe. That night, as the stars blinked over the bay and the breeze smelled like pine and promise, Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You happy?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, because happy was too small a word for what I felt. I turned to him, rested my forehead against his, and whispered, "I'm whole." We stood there, our children asleep inside, the night wrapping around us like a blessing. Not because everything had turned out perfect, but because I had turned out okay. Because I had walked through fire and built a life from the ash.